Masechet Nedarim Daf Samech Daled. We begin the 9th perek with the topic of annulling vows. Very interesting things that are coming up here. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Potchin le'adam b'chvod aviv v'imo v'chachamim osrin. We're going to see a couple of cases in this Mishnah where Rabbi Eliezer is more lenient, more permissive of annulling vows. And the first case is that if someone makes a vow, they can go to a chacham. You have to go to a sage, and the chacham can find a peticha, an opening. This means if an unforeseen circumstance. If you had known that this would be a result of your vow, would you have made a vow? It's kind of like an implicit condition. And if the person says, no, I would not have made the vow, no, if I knew this consequence, then the chacham can say, okay, your vow is annulled. So that's called potchin. So here we do it with the honor of his father and mother. And we're talking about a case, really any vow, but since chachamim say, a vow brings shame upon a person. And people say about this person, look at this person who makes vows all the time, right? And they speak badly about the person's father and mother. What kind of upbringing did they have? Maybe it must be a terrible upbringing. Sad. What a sad lot for a father and mother who has such a child that makes vows. Now, if a person, the Chacham will say to the person, had you known that your parents would experience public shame because you made this vow, would you have made this vow? So generally, we assume people like their parents and don't want their parents to be shamed, and so therefore the person, assuming he says no, I would not want my parents to feel shame. So then the Chacham say, okay, that's a good enough reason. We can undo your vow. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. However, Chachamim disagree and say, no, that is not the case. The undoing of a vow, the finding of a peticha, has to relate to the actual subject of the vow, and it can't just be in general that, your parents would have felt shame about it. All right, that's first machloket. We're going to add more to this. Amar Rabbi Sadok, ad shepotchin lo b'chvod abi v'imo, yiftechu lo b'chvod hamakom, im ken en nedarim. Rabbi Sadok seems to be backing up the chachamim and saying, giving a good reason for Chamim. It says, well, instead of doing an annulment based on the honor of a person's father and mother, why don't you just go and make an annulment based on the honor of God? And if you do so, then that will be ad absurdum. There'll never be a vow. In other words, you can also say to a person, making a vow is a negative thing, right? We saw before, a person's called a rasha. And this disgraces the honor of God that when the person makes a vow. And so therefore you can always just go, anytime anyone makes a vow, no matter what the subject, the Chacham could tell him, if you had known that you would bring dishonor to your Creator, would you have made the vow? And so no one's going to say, oh yeah, I would have made it anyway, right? The person's going to be embarrassed, even though they don't really mean it. They're going to say, oh no, I would never have done that, even though, right, secretly they might think to themselves that they would have, and therefore the annulment is not a valid annulment. And so there will never be any nedarim, because you could always easily undo any vow by saying, well, anytime you could make a vow, you're dishonoring God. Would you have wanted to dishonor God? And everybody's going to say no. Okay, the Bavli here is going to have two explanations of this line, im ken and nedarim. Okay, I explained this to Rabbi Sadok that he is backing up Chachamim, giving a reason to Chachamim. There are other people that had explained Rabbi Sadok differently, but I think the Mishnah flows more easily this way. Now, modim chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer b'davar shebeno leben abi ve'imo shepotchin lo b'chvod abi ve'imo. However, even though chachamim and Rabbi Sadok said that they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, and they say you cannot use annulment based on parents, and certainly not based on God, and nevertheless, even chachamim will agree with Rabbi Eliezer that if the subject matter of the vow relates to the relationship between a person and his parents, then you can use a peticha regarding the honor of one's parents. For example, if someone said, a guy gets into a fight with his parents and says, I make a vow, my parents can never come over. to my house. In that case, right, people are going to start talking. Did you hear what happened? They got into a fight. He made a vow. Oh, what shame on these parents that they can't go to their son's house. In that case, if the person comes to the Chacham and say, I feel bad about this, and says, well, would you have made this vow knowing that your parents would be shamed because everybody's going to be talking about them, how you disinvited them from your home? And he says, no, and then I never would have made this vow concerning my parents. So Chachamim agree that if that's the subject of the vow, then fine. So Chachamim do agree that you can annul vows, but the annulment has to be according to the subject of the vow, not something in general. At this point, it's worth bringing in an amazing Talmud Yerushalmi on this Mishnah, which wonders, how come it says Modim Chachamim, they agree with Rabbi Eliezer regarding a father and mother. It doesn't say that they would agree regarding the honor of Hamakom. How come they don't say, if it's a vow that relates to something, to the relationship between a person and Hashem, how come you can't use that annulment and say, if you had known that this would bring shame upon to you from your creator, then you would not have made it? How come they only agree regarding father and mother and not Hamakom? So here, let me just show you the Yerushalmi. And so it answers, well, what would be an example of kevod makom? Well, what's the example of some vow that someone would make that would diminish from the honor of hamakom? For example, if he says, I'm not going to make a sukkah, or makes a vow, I'm not going to take a lulav, I'm not going to wear tefillin, that would be kavod makom. Right? Wouldn't that be? This is no mashma ledinafshehu mahane kedahada im sadakta matiten lo im chatata matif'al bo. No, in fact, all these things do not diminish anything from God. The person is actually only hurting himself. As the pasuk says, if you do righteous things, do you give something to God? Does God benefit because you did a mitzvah? And if you make a sin, does that diminish from God in any way? God is perfect, unchanging, almighty, and God does not need your sacrifices, doesn't need your prayers, doesn't need your good deeds, doesn't need your mitzvot. Hashem does not get elevated or diminished in any way. Rather, the mitzvot, not doing a mitzvah, diminishes the person himself. And therefore, since it will not diminish God, so that would not be a way to find a peticha if you had known this would bring shame. Nothing you can do can bring shame to the Almighty. So that's a pretty interesting take on the Mishnah, and fits very well with Rambam's understanding of the reasons for mitzvot, which benefit us and do not benefit the Creator. Okay. So that's all issue number one regarding undoing vows by using, by saying, wouldn't your parents be ashamed if they had by this vow, then would you have undone it? Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, you can use that. Rabbi Sadok and Chamim say, no, you cannot, unless that the subject of the vow is a relationship with one's parents. And now the second one is nolad. Ve'od amar Rabbi Eliezer, potchin benolad, Chachamim osrim. Rabbi Eliezer says that you can use an unforeseen circumstance, a new situation, or that's something that will be born that wasn't yet. You can use that to annul a vow. Chachamim say you can't. Here's 3 examples. Kesad. Amar kunam shani nehene li ish piloni v'nasa sofer. A person says, I'm not going to have any benefit from that guy. He gets into a fight, doesn't like him. At that point, he was just a regular guy. And then at some time later, that person becomes a sofer. A sofer can mean literally, like we say today, he's a scribe, and he's the only scribe in town. He needs him. He has to buy a mezuzah. He has to write a contract. So now he needs the sofer. So you tell him, right, if you had known that this guy would become a sofer, would you have made the vow? The person says, no, I never would have made the vow. I thought he was just a regular guy, right? He just had a store. So I won't go to his store, I'll go to someone else's store. But if I knew he was going to be a sofer and I would need his services, I would never have made the vow. That's valid. A sofer can also mean a sage, a tamid chacham. Is also called a sofer or a teacher, divrei sofrim. Okay, so it could mean those things also, but those also things that someone needs, right? If I knew he was going to be a teacher or a chacham, and I would have to ask him questions, I never would have made this vow. That's case number one. Or sheya mesiet beno v'amad ilo hayiti yodea shu na'asa sofer, or sheya mesiet beno bekarov lo hayiti noded. Or he makes a vow against a certain person, and then that person is making a wedding for his son, and so now the one who made the vow says, "Oh, I want to go to the wedding." Right? I didn't realize that he was going to make a wedding so soon. All right, I am maybe he didn't know he had a son, or the son was very young or very old, and wasn't expecting him to be married at any time. It could be that he made the vow. Let's say, Mrs. I'm not going to have any benefit. I'm not going to have any benefit from that guy for the next month. And then the kid was not even going out with anyone. And then all of a sudden, kid finds someone and they get married within a month. So you could say, I didn't expect that the kid would be married in a month, and then I wouldn't be invited to the wedding. Right? They're probably actually friends, but sometimes friends get into a fight and says, okay, I'm not coming over to your house. I'm not gonna have any benefit from you for a month. And then all of a sudden, there's a wedding within the month, so that would be a valid, according to the B. Eliezer, that would be a valid reason to annul the vow. I never would have made the vow, kind of like an implicit condition. Or, third example, kunam lebayit zeh shani nichnas v'nasa bet knesset. Amar ilo hayiti yodea shu nasit bet knesset, lo hayiti noder. Rabbi Eliezer matir chachamim osrim. In this case also, someone says, I'm not going into this house. At the time that he made the vow, it was a private house of some guy that he knew, and he got into a fight. He says, I'm never coming into this house. And all of a sudden, the house was turned into a bet knesset. Whatever, he sold it, or he opened a breakaway minyan there. And now he wants to be able to come to this Bet Knesset and pray there. So then he could come to the Chacham and says, the Chacham will ask him, if you had known that this house here would become Bet Knesset, would you have made a vow? The person says, no, I never would have made a vow knowing that. So in that case, Rabbi Eliezer would call it an implicit condition, and therefore the vow does not apply, and we can annul the vow in that way. Chachamim, however, said this does not work. Why would Chachamim disagree? Perhaps because these are things that are rare occurrences, right? What are the chances? How many times does a house get turned into a Bet Knesset? And so, therefore, it might be that even at the time that he made the vow, if you would tell him, listen, maybe this house will be a Bet Knesset, the person making the vow will say, oh, that's so far-fetched. What are the chances, right? 1 in 10,000 chance that this will be a Bet Knesset. I'll make the vow anyway, right? So, therefore, since most people would make the vow anyway, since there's very little chance that such a thing would happen, therefore, you cannot use this to undo the vow, right? What are the chances that some regular guy off the street is going to be all of a sudden become a sofer? Right, or that this kid who wasn't even going out with anyone is going to get married within a month. So these are all unforeseen, rare circumstances, and the person actually maybe would have made the vow, even knowing it. And so that's why Chachamim are more stringent. All right, now the Gemara asks, "Mai en nedarim? Amar Abaye, im ken en nedarim nitarin yafeh." What is this line that was said? And according to the way we interpret it in the mouth of Rabbi Sadok, that said, that asked the question, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you're going to annul vows based on the idea that, if you made this vow, did you know that it would bring shame to your father and mother? Would you still do it? The person says, no, I wouldn't have done it. And Rabbi Sadok says, no, that's no good. You can't do that, because that's the same as you can undo any vow, right? If you make a vow, did you know this will bring dishonor to God? The person says, I never would have done that. You can't annul vows based on this, because if you do that, there will never be a neder. So what does that mean, that there'll be never be a neder? So Abaye explains that it's not that there will be nedarim. A person can make a neder, and it will be binding. The meaning of the statement is that nedarim will not be annulled in a proper way, because the Chacham is going to tell a person, would you have made this knowing that you'd bring shame to your Creator? So no one would it's very intimidating, right? Nobody would say, yes, I would have made it even though it would bring shame to my Creator. Yes, I would have known it, I'd done it even if it would bring shame to my parents. And nobody's so impudent that they're going to say such a thing. And so they're going to say, they would lie and say, oh, I never would have made the vow. Even though in their mind they're thinking, you know what, I really still would have made the vow. I really hate that guy. I still would have done it. And therefore, the Chacham is going to annul the vow, but based on false pretenses, and the annulment is not going to be a proper annulment. And that's the reason. So they have to find a more regular reason, right? Would you have made this vow, knowing that the consequence would be so difficult for you? And so, right, the person really has to think about it and say, oh, then I really wouldn't have. So it has to be some kind of case where the person would tell the truth, and the shame is too much, then the person would not admit the truth. Okay, that's one. Rava Amar, Im ken en nedarim nishalin lechacham. Rava says, no, that's not the thing. The problem is that if you allow a chacham to use the shame of the parents or shame of God to undo vows, then a person will no longer come to a chacham at all. Because remember, the last few times I made a vow, I went to the chacham. He said, if you knew that your parents would be shamed by you, would you still do it? I said, no, I wouldn't have done it, right? And he gets the pattern. So the next time he says, I don't have to go to the Chacham. I know what he's going to say. He's going to say, if I brought shame to my parents, I wouldn't have done it. And so I wouldn't have done it, right? And I wouldn't want to bring shame to my parents. I don't have to go to the Chacham. I know what he's going to say. I'll undo it myself. But that doesn't work. You can't annul your own vow. You have to go to a Chacham, right? That's the process. And so that's what Abba says. The Chacham shouldn't use this across the board type of annulment, because then the person will not come to Chacham himself. Rather, the Chacham has to use more specific ones that the person says, see, he knows what he's doing. I better go to the Chacham the next time to see how he can help me with this particular case. All right, so now we're going to ask a question to Rava based on this Mishnah. Tenan, umodin chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer b'davar shebeno leben abi ve'imo, shepotchin lo b'chvod abi ve'imo. So the continuation of our Mishnah says that Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Eliezer that if the subject matter of the vow has to do with one's parents, like a person said, my parents can't come over to my house anymore, in that case, you can use the honor of one's parents as the reason for annulment. Now let's see. Does this make sense according to both opinions? This would make sense according to Abaye, who says that if so, the annulment is not going to be undone in a proper way, because most people are not so impudent that they would say, I would have made a vow against my parents anyway. So if it's a vow that has nothing to do with one's parents, a person just says, I'm not going to eat meat for the next 5 years. And then goes to the Chacham and said, everybody's talking about how you made this vow, and it's bringing shame to your parents. Would you have made the vow? Now, maybe the person in his mind saying, I really would have made the vow, but he doesn't want to admit out loud that he would bring shame to his parents. So he says no, even though really he would have. So that was Abaye's problem. And that applies to vows about any other subject. But if the vow was against his own parents, he said, my parents can never come over to my house. Well, that shows that he is impudent and he would bring shame to his parents. That's why he made the vow in the first place. In that case, if he comes to the Chacham and the Chacham says, would you have made this vow that you said that your parents can never come to your house? Would you have made this knowing it would bring shame on your parents? This guy would say, yes, that's precisely the reason I made the vow. I wanted to bring shame to my parents, right? That's why he made the vow. He was angry at them. And so, in this case, if he says, oh, you know what? I didn't really mean to bring shame upon my parents. I was just saying it out of anger. I just, didn't want them to come over, but I didn't mean to shame them publicly. So if he says that, then he really means it. Because if he didn't really mean it, then he would say, right, he didn't have no problem making a vow against his parents. He would have no problem telling the Chacham that he would have made the vow anyway, despite the shame. And so in this case, we do believe him. If he says he wouldn't have made it, then he wouldn't have made it knowing it would bring shame, then we know that he's sincere. So this line makes sense according to Abaye. אלא לרבד, אמר אם כן אין נדרים נשאלין לחכם, הכה עמי פותחין. But according to Rava, his reason was, if we're going to allow annulling a vow based on shame of parents, and then once we do it a few times, people are going to stop coming to the Chacham at all. So according to Rava, that should apply across the board. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is. Even if the subject matter is about one's parents, right? People will still get the idea. Oh, did you know, right? Your parents are going to be shamed. And then also, people will stop coming to the Chacham, won't they? So Rava, how are you going to explain that line of Rabbi Sadok? Amri, kevan dechol nidre la sagya lehon delav chacham hachaname potchin. And the answer is, since all other nedarim, it's not sufficient to go to a chacham. Here they can broach, they can use this as a peticha. In other words, since the Chacham is only going to use this strategy when the subject of the vow is regarding one's parents, so the Chacham's not going to be using it all the time. He's only going to be using it in these few cases. In all other cases, this is not going to work to just assume, oh, my parents would be shamed, and the sages are not using it. So since in all other cases, one knows, well, I have to go to the sage because this, if I vow I'm not going to eat meat, then I know the sage is not going to ask me about my parents. He's going to say, did you know that when you're on a given occasion and you're going to want to eat meat, did you have that in mind? So he's going to say something that's particular to the subject of the vow, right? So since in all other vows it would not be sufficient to not go to a chacham, and we're only using this strategy for vows have to do with one's parents, so then in general he'll still continue going to the chacham and he's not going to abuse that, and so there's no problem. So therefore we can explain that line of the Mishnah according to both Rava and Abaye. So we have no problem. Okay, we go to the next section. Ve'od amar Rabbi Eliezer potchim benolad. Okay, where something is a new situation, Rabbi Eliezer says we can take that into account. Amai tamad Rabbi Eliezer amar Rav Chisda amar keda ki metu kol hanashim v'hamita denoladu mikan shepotchin benolad. So the source of Rabbi Eliezer is from Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe was in Egypt and he saw the two men fighting, and he goes and he sees the Egyptian that's harming the Israelite, and he goes and kills the Egyptian, and then he hears, there's people that from Paro that are looking to kill you. So then he had to run away. Okay, so he goes to Yitzhak. Now, it doesn't say the following in the Torah, but on the next stuff where it's gonna mention the derivation, it says that we're going to derive that Moshe made a vow to Yitzhak, his father-in-law, that he's not going to leave and go back to Egypt. He's going to stay. Yitzhak was like, what? You're here just because you ran away? Well, then you're going to marry my daughter. Then you're gonna go back home. So Moshe says, no, I'm making a vow. I'm going to stay here with you and with your daughter and bring up a family here. So Moshe made a vow, and now in order to go back home, he would have to first annul the vow. So here's what Rav Chisda said. The pasuk says that all the people that were seeking to kill you have died. Now, the death of the people seeking to kill you is a new situation. And so based on that, he was able to annul his vow. In other words, Moshe went to a chacham, or I don't know who he went to, but he was able to annul the vow based on someone saying to Moshe, hey Moshe, would you have made this vow knowing that the people that were running after you to kill you would die? And so, right, it's not unusual. I don't know how old the people were that were running after him. Right? Usually they're going to stick around for, if they're the same age as Moshe, then they're going to be alive while Moshe is alive. So when he made the vow, he assumed that the people wanting to kill him would be alive for his whole life too, and so he would never go back. But now, all of a sudden, new situation, unexpected news that those people died young. And so now the coast is clear and he can go back. Would you have made the vow that you're never going to go back to Egypt and helped out your nation and done anything had the knowing that these people die, says, no, I never would have made the vow. So that's why Moshe was able to annul his vow, and that's why he was able to go back. So you see from here, the Eliezer derives that you can annul a vow based on a new situation. Good. Rabbanan, what are you going to do with that? That sounds like a good proof. כל מקום שנאמר ניסים וניסבים אינן אלא דתן ואבירם אלא אמר השקיש שירדו מנכסיהן. So the Chachamim can answer based on a different midrash of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rashbi, that whenever we see nitzim and nitzabim, so these two words are referring to, the first case is nisim, the two men who were fighting. That's the two Israelites who were fighting that we read about in the second Perek. And Nitzavim, this refers to, here we can see the Pesukim, after Moshe and Aharon go to Paro and say, let my people go, and they say, oh, you're asking for freedom? You must have too much time on your hands. So now the people have to make the same amount of bricks and they're not going to give them hay. And so then the people came and complained, right? The Israelites themselves, they confronted Moshe and Aharon standing in front of them, and they said, right, look, you made our situation worse. So these Nitzavim, who are they? And who are those Nitzim? Who are those people that originally were fighting? These are none other than Datan v'Aviram. But Datan v'Aviram did not die, because we see that they continue in the rest of the story, and the rest of the Torah, they're still alive. So you see, it's actually not true that they died. So what does it mean that kimetu? They didn't literally die. It means that they lost their property. They became poor. And so that was a kind of death, in the sense that when someone's rich, then they gain credibility. For some reason, people think that if someone's rich, then you should ask for their wisdom, and they know what they're talking about. That was only true back then. Today, that doesn't happen. And so when they became poor, then they stopped being respected by the people around them. So it was like they died. They died. Their status died. So they didn't literally die, they were still around. So therefore, you see, it was not a new situation. And so therefore, you cannot learn from there that you can undo a vow based on a new situation. So that's how Rabbanan read that story. Okay, this midrash is interesting that we have these unknown people. That some people came and were fighting. Some people came to Moshe. The midrash always likes to take anonymous people and associate them with people whose names we know. This is a good example of filling in that gap by saying, oh, well, we know Datan v'Aviram, they were troublemakers. So anytime we see troublemakers before, let's assume that they were also Datan v'Aviram. All right, we ended off with one last agadah that supports this idea that someone who goes from riches to poverty experiences something like death. So we're going to add other people who have an experience of death, although not literally. Someone who has no children is considered like they're dead. From what Rachel says to Yaakov, right, give me children or else I am dead. Not literally that she's dead. I mean, you could explain that she's going to kill herself or something. But she doesn't say that. She says, I am dead if I don't have children. So someone who has no children is considered like dead. A Baraita says there's 4 people who are considered like they're dead. Ani, someone who's impoverished, right, is always worried about their next meal. It's not a way to live. So that would support the drasha that we just had. Umesora, someone who has the skin disease, a terrible, painful skin disease. Soma, someone who's blind. Umisha eno banim, and someone who has no children, which is what Ribal said. Ani dichtiv kimetu kol ha'anashim. How do we know a poor person? Because of the drasha we just said, that says the people that were seeking to kill you have died. If that is indeed Vatan v'Aviram, they weren't dead. So it must be that they became poor, and that's why they're considered like dead. Mesora dichtiv al natihi kamet. when Miriam gets Mesorah, so then Aaron says to Moshe, pray for her, let her not be like a dead person. Well, she wasn't dead. She just had this disease where, skin becomes all scaly and looks like it's all decayed, right? So like a dead person. V'soma dichtiv b'machashakim hoshivani kemete olam. In Echa, it says Hashem has brought me into a dark place, and like I'm living among those who are dead. This, by the way, can have halachic significance. For example, is one allowed to desecrate Shabbat in order to save one's eyesight, even if it's not life-threatening? So this would be a consideration to say that, if becoming blind is like being dead, then that would also be considered pikuach nefesh. And the last one, same as the source that Rabbi Yoshe ben Levi said, but he's not Mourad. Now we have it in a Baraita as well. Rachel said, if I don't have children, I am like dead. It's like I am dead, and therefore someone who has no children has no future, and therefore is also considered as if they are dead. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.